We'll start off on Hungary. First of all, what was your reaction to finding out that it was a landslide?
Well, I think it's great news. I think a lot of people in Europe and, well, the entire Western world really started to see Orban for who he really was. And something that I really find interesting is that everyone who you expect would come out and say something bad about Orban losing, it was exactly the same people who you would expect to come out and say such a thing, right? We talked last time about Eva Vlaardingenbroek. She immediately came out and was like, "Oh, this is a dark day for Europe and for European history," and which is really funny to me. Michael Knowles said the same thing, like this is a dark day for Europe or something for the West, which is really funny because their main talking points are anti-immigration. Well, the new guy, Magyar is his name. He is arguably equally as anti-immigration as Orban is. So what is their problem with this guy exactly? Except that he is not pro-Kremlin, right? Like that seems to me like the only thing that they could argue against this guy. Because to me, he seems to be really a great example of what a European leader should be. Like he's not anti-EU, but he is anti all the nonsense that does come with the EU, such as the immigration pact, which we talked about last week as well, which is really bad. But there are also positive aspects to the EU, and clearly our enemies want to dissolve the EU. And he is very anti-Russia. He is actually pro-Hungary. And yeah, he did say like, yeah, he isn't exactly anti-Ukraine at all, but he basically says we don't have the money to help fund Ukraine, which is kind of valid. I mean, Hungary is not a rich country. There are a few rich people, especially Orban's friends and himself, who are extremely wealthy. But yeah, I think it's great news. It's a great white pill for the kind of like the status quo that is happening in Europe, and well, also just for Hungary itself. And of course, Orban was involved, still is involved in many proxy fundings of Russian money into the West, into think tanks and stuff. So hopefully that gets cracked down now as well. But I'm quite optimistic.
He was in power for over a decade. Was he just a result of Russia maintaining a lot of its influence in parts of Eastern Europe, or do you think he was his own guy and Russia just got hold of him at some point?
Well, I think the first thing you said, them keeping a foothold in Hungary all this time, is absolutely the case. I don't think they ever truly went away now. Maybe with Magyar in power, that might be the case. I always do remain kind of skeptical of people in positions of power. I really hope he is who he says he is and who he claims to be and who he appears to be. I guess we'll find out. But yeah, the reason why, like, what is the motive? It's a good question. There is one thing that I do know is that there have been some allegations made towards him by some relatively prominent people, such as Laszlo Kovac, who worked for a courier for none other than Mogilevich. Now, Mogilevich used to operate in Budapest, actually. And this is really like the crime boss of crime bosses in Russia currently. So this guy is, uh, he has a $5 million bounty if you can give the FBI any information that leads to his arrest. He was on the top 10 most wanted list for a very long time. So, according to Kovac, who worked as a courier for Mogilevich, Orban actually accepted large sums of cash from Mogilevich. So, and there was someone else, Dietmar Clodo. He claimed something similar, that he delivered Mogilevich money to Orban's longtime associate, Sandor Pinter, who was the head of the Budapest police at the time, to allegedly turn a blind eye on like Mogilevic's scheming with Ukraine and Russia. And like I said, his main office was in Budapest. And it is interesting that Orban was actually invited to visit Moscow right after Margalevich was arrested there for, some tax fraud or tax evasion scheme, I believe. And according to Clodo, Margalevich handed over compromising information and even tapes of Orban to the FSB, and he claims that this was the exact moment that Orban made a sharp U-turn on his policies. So Margalevich was later released, promising not to flee the country, probably because they could use him as a very useful tool with all the connections that he had and still has. Like, this guy is really like the biggest mafia boss in the world, really. And allegedly, Orban was quite affiliated with him, which is a pretty big deal if that's true. And these are Kovac now said that since the government has changed, he's willing to testify that all of what he's saying is true, and I really hope he does, because if this comes out, it would clear up a lot of things. Like, Mogilevich was, first of all, arrested not by Orban, but by Moscow, right? So by the Moscow commandos actually entered his home and arrested him. And even if Mogilevich didn't have a foothold over Orban anymore, now he gave that compromising information that he took money from this very prominent gangster to the FSB that they can now use against him, right? And again, it is interesting that he was invited to Moscow right after he was arrested in Moscow, that Orban went to Moscow right after that happened. That is very peculiar to me.
The media that has lied about any right-wing nationalist type of figure, whether it's Trump, Bolsonaro, Milei, etc., they've also had a very negative view on Viktor Orban. So this is one of the justifications people use to take Orban's side. But as we've talked about, by that logic, we should all be wearing Russian shirts and chanting "Death to Ukraine." So we're better than that. Was there truth in? I know it's a very general topic, the liberal media, but were they accurate with Orban? Like, when they described him as a totalitarian leader who took away democracy and centralized a lot of things and took away people's voices. Did they exaggerate? Like, what's your stance on how the media portrayed him?
I think this is one of these things where a lot of, it's like you said, right? Just because the left says that the sky is blue doesn't make it green. But I think the West in general tends to really shoot itself in the foot when they exaggerate with these things a lot, right? Like, of course, Orban was a kind of like a populist kind of guy. He really played into this anti-Soros thing. That was basically his whole shtick when he first got elected, actually. And, this anti-woke, anti-LGBTQ, pro-family, this kind of person. So if you then start to demonize even that aspect of him, you make yourself look extremely horrible, especially to anyone who's even remotely right-wing or remotely conservative, because they always claim that his immigration policies were horrible, even though we have to get into that, because that's kind of the issue that I always point out with these people who claim that Orban was Hungary first or whatever. Yeah, he really wasn't. If he was, I would respect him, but he has Chinese police officers patrolling the streets in Hungary. Is that Hungary first? Like, he was not only very much in bed with Russia, but also with China, which, arguably could even potentially be even worse, especially economically speaking. But he did crack down on a lot of the media there. So, did he take away democracy? Not really. If he did, then he wouldn't have lost the last election, right? So yeah, again, they should really stop exaggerating with these things and call him out for what he really is. But once you do that, once you exaggerate like that, of course, everyone on the right and in the conservative movement and stuff are actually going to think that this guy is like some kind of hero. And that's always how it goes. And unfortunately, that's exactly how it went with Orban too, because that's all people know about him, right? Americans don't know anything about Hungary. They just see Orban on, being interviewed by Tucker Carlson and talking about how he wants to raise the birth rate of the country. Wow, what a hero, right? Which didn't actually work that well anyway. But it is true that he tried, but that doesn't mean that overall he was a net benefit to Hungary, because it was absolutely not the case.
He gave Russia classified info about Ukraine that came from the European Union, and he blocked $100 billion for Ukraine. Those examples alone show just how much of a Russian shill he was and how much intelligence he was providing for Russia. I don't know all of the details exactly, so if you could just go into that, what kind of info he was providing for Russia, how he was sabotaging Ukraine and Europe, and then we'll get on to the other points you mentioned.
Well, I think you already just spoke about the two biggest ones, which happened somewhat recently, actually. But it's funny because even before all of that happened, it was already very obvious whose side this guy was on, because he always promoted the same rhetoric as all these other Kremlin shills do, which is like, oh, we need to worry about our own countries, not about Ukraine, right? And they always talk about we want sovereign nation states. He also has this Patriots for Europe initiative with Marine Le Pen, who is, I'm pretty sure you know about her too, but she's actually very close with Putin himself. So is her whole family. Her party was openly financed by Russian banks, right? It's a complete, it's really crazy how that goes. Also with Andrej Babiš, he is from the Czech Republic, but he allegedly worked with the STB, actually, the Czechoslovak Communist Secret Police. Matteo Salvini is also in this party, who wears Putin shirts to the EU Parliament and stuff. And Geert Wilders of the Netherlands, who is also very anti-Ukraine, and the Vlaams Belang Party from Belgium. Like it's really always the same people, and they always promote the same narratives that we want a sovereign European nation states not controlled by the EU. So if the EU says, yeah, we need to fund Ukraine in order for Ukraine to beat Russia, to keep Russia out of Europe, they're like, oh no, this is not our war, right? It's Ukraine's war, which is complete nonsense, because Hungary is very close to Ukraine, and if Russia gets access over Ukraine, Hungary, well, they already had quite a foothold in Hungary, so I'm not sure why they would really want to take it over militarily when Orban was in power. But, it really comes down to the same talking points every single time. And every time that happens, when you're like, this person is a little suspicious, something comes out that, oh, yeah, they were actually funded by Russia, or they were actually working very much in their favor by blocking, I think it was like $90 billion, like you said, for Ukraine, which was now unfrozen thanks to Magyar. And yeah, what you said as well about the foreign minister leaking secrets to Moscow, to Sergei Lavrov specifically. I mean, it's just crazy to me how every time you suspect someone to be on the Kremlin payroll, it turns out to be, they do something so obvious that just completely vindicates that sentiment. And it happens every single time. And I mean, yeah, you wanted to know more about what he has done for Russia? Well, first of all, there were multi-billion-dollar loans, Russian loans, for the construction of a nuclear power plant in Hungary. There's the resale of Russian gas from Turk Stream pipeline and discounted oil via the Druzhba pipeline, giving Moscow more structural leverage. I mean, they actively supported his Ukraine, of course, just like all the Kremlin cronies did. I mean, his entire behavior in the EU was extraordinarily beneficial to Moscow by being the only opponent of aid to Ukraine in the entire EU. That's a pretty big thing, using his veto to absorb all the backlash and, allowing other opponents to remain in the shadows, basically. And another thing he did was he constantly uses terminology like hegemonic liberal ideology and Western hegemony. Like, it's straight out of Dugin's playbook, it seems. But going back to the think tanks and stuff I was talking about, so there's this MCC in Brussels, which is financed by Russian oil earnings. And of course, it's used to amplify rhetoric that benefits Moscow. And of course, he also funded the CPAC Hungary, all kinds of NetCon conferences with people like Nigel Farage and Peter Thiel, right? And the Roger Scruton Legacy Foundation in the UK. It's really obvious that this it's just being used as a proxy to fund networks who are aligned with Moscow with Russian money without it directly coming from Russia. And I'm quite convinced that this is just one of the many proxies they use. There's also the Danube Institute, which is also based in Budapest, which has a cooperation agreement with the Heritage Foundation. Like, how are these things allowed to happen? That would be my question, really. How do people not stop this from happening in the West? Because it's so clearly that, they called it the Budapest Bridge. Well, that's exactly what it is. And also, he allowed a lot of oligarchs and a lot of Chinese, or at least just very wealthy people, and they turned out to be mostly Chinese and Russian, to buy something what Trump also had, like the golden passport thing. That's a program that he had as well, where you could buy your way into Hungary, and then you had access to the entire Schengen area. You could just operate everywhere. And there's also a lot of Hungarian embassy involvement in Washington, D.C., which a lot of people in the White House have actually called out as well, which is all sponsored with Orban money, which comes from Russian oil earnings. So again, why is this allowed to happen? I don't know.
Well, I want to get on to CPAC Hungary and how this ties to Eva Vladenberg and Marine Le Pen. We'll get onto that later about the EU and Angela Merkel and stuff. But is there anything else in regards to Orban's cooperation with Russia and, anything else that people should know about?
Well, I think the Chinese angle is very important too, because he was a big proponent of the multipolar world order, actually, which to me, once someone speaks positively about a multipolar world order, there's no way this person is pro-European in any way whatsoever, even when they try to raise the birth rates of the native population, which I think is great. But, that does not make up for anything of the kind of promoting the multipolar world order, if you ask me. So he had a talk with Xi Jinping, and after that he said, looking back at the world economy and world trade as it was 20 years ago, back then it was nothing like that which we live with today. Then we were living in a unipolar world order, and now we live in a multipolar world order. And one of the structural pillars of this new world order is the People's Republic of China. Now, who says such a thing if they're really pro-Hungary? Oh, another thing that I forgot to mention. He said to Putin that Putin is a lion and he is, Orban himself called himself a mouse. How degrading is that? Like, he's literally kissing the ass of Putin by calling him this majestic animal, and he's just a tiny little mouse. how it's so embarrassing. Yeah, he also proudly stated that Asia will be the dominant center of the world, not Europe, right? I mean, isn't that what you want? Aren't you like a pro-European? If you're pro-Hungary, you want Europe to flourish, right? Because it's in Europe, not Asia. Unless he has some, he's one of these Hungarians who claims to have Genghis Khan blood or something, that he feels like he's some kind of Asian supremacist. I don't know. But he also stated that Europe must abandon the illusion of federalism and the continent must be made multipolar. He said the liberal world order ended in 2025. We're entering a new era. So now he's promoting the fact, or the lie really, that the unipolar world order is just some liberal world order, right? Some woke world order, like Dugan would also agree with him on, but that the multipolar world order is some kind of based conservative utopia or whatever, which it clearly is not. And yeah, he agreed with Beijing on a security deal that included Chinese police officers patrolling Hungary's streets, and they let thousands of Chinese citizens obtain residence permits without any security checks, which is a massive national security risk for both Hungary and Europe. Again, is that something that someone who's Hungary first would actually do? I don't think so. He also planned to build an almost $2 billion satellite campus for Shanghai's Fudan University in Budapest. And there were some documents that got leaked which showed that the government would take out a $1.5 billion loan from a Chinese bank to cover the majority of the costs and use Chinese contractors to complete the project. So that would again allow way more Chinese people to flood into Hungary. And there was a Chinese foreign minister, Wang Yi. He actually said that the university in Budapest was a top priority for Beijing. Okay, and who cares? Why the hell would Europe care about Beijing's priorities? It's insanity. And since 2017, Hungarian police and other governmental institutions have used Chinese surveillance equipment from Dahua Technology and Hikvision, which are two companies that have been sanctioned and flagged by the US and the EU for being a national security threat. And they are using this. And they're also Hungary's largest foreign investor, thanks to Orban. And he also made the Chinese-backed Belgrade-Budapest rail link deal happen, which, of course, Alexander Vucic of Serbia also played a big role in as well, who is also a massive Kremlin stooge. And Orban was also the only EU leader to attend the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing. I mean, again, does that sound like a pro-Hungary guy? So yeah, maybe now that I think of it, now that I name all these things, maybe the Hungarian economy did improve because of Chinese and Russian investments, which, is basically a ticking time bomb and is not exactly the kind of economic prosperity, short-term prosperity that you want any European country to prosper from.